The studio lights burned bright that evening, throwing long shadows over the polished floor of the stage. The cameras were already rolling when Keanu Reeves stepped out from behind the curtain, his steady stride calm but thoughtful. The audience erupted in cheers, some rising to their feet, clapping, shouting his name. Keanu lifted a hand in thanks, his expression warm but modest, as though the noise belonged to someone else. He had never chased applause, yet it always seemed to follow him. This was not just another interview. The host had promised sparks, and the producers had whispered that Angelina Jolie would join midway. People in the crowd leaned forward, hungry for drama. They wanted fire, words that cut sharp, a clash that would travel across social media within minutes. Keanu, however, wanted something else entirely. He wanted truth. He wanted to talk about kindness, resilience, the small things that mattered far more than any headline. But the night did not begin softly. The first questions came fast, aimed like arrows. Keanu, people call you the internet's darling, the world's most humble actor. But is it real? Or is it a mask? For a moment the room felt colder. The audience held their breath, waiting for him to flinch. But Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, voice low and steady. I am just a man who has lived through loss, through mistakes, through small joys. I do not wear masks. I live. There was honesty in his tone that silenced the whispers, but the silence was short-lived. The curtain shifted and Angelina Jolie appeared. The crowd gasped. She carried herself with the weight of a storm, graceful, fierce, impossible to ignore. She took her seat beside him, her eyes sharp, her smile carrying both charm and challenge. The host wasted no time. Angelina, what do you think of Keanu's view of humility? Does Hollywood really reward kindness? Or is it all an act? She laughed lightly, but her words cut. Kindness is nice in stories. In this industry, it is not what keeps you alive. Keanu has survived, yes, but maybe it is because people like him too much to see the flaws. The audience reacted with nervous chuckles. The stage air tightened. Keanu looked at her, not with anger, but with patience, as though he understood more than he said. He thought of the nights he had spent alone, the grief of losing loved ones, the emptiness of fame. He did not need to win this clash. He only needed to be true. Flaws make us human, he replied softly. And kindness is not a story. It is what helps us live with ourselves when the lights go out. The crowd stirred again, sensing the clash of worlds, her fire against his calm, her sharpness against his quiet truth. Angelina tilted her head, eyes narrowing as though testing him further. So you believe humility is enough? Even when power, influence, and control decide who stays at the top? The question was meant to corner him, but it opened a door instead. Keanu leaned back, his voice carrying not just to her, but to everyone watching at home. Staying at the top is not the goal. I want to stay human. That is harder than any role I have ever played. Applause thundered through the studio, but beneath the noise was tension. Angelina's expression softened for a second, as though she had not expected his words to pierce her guard. She recovered quickly, smiling again, but something in her eyes betrayed thought. The host, sensing gold, pushed harder. Angelina, you've said before that Hollywood is a battlefield. Do you think Keanu is too gentle for it? She leaned toward the microphone, her voice low, deliberate. Sometimes gentleness is weakness. Sometimes people mistake silence for strength. But silence can also hide fear. The air grew heavy. The audience shifted uncomfortably, waiting for Keanu's answer. Cameras zoomed in on his face, the world ready to capture the crack, the stumble, the defensive spark. But Keanu did not stumble. He smiled faintly, his eyes carrying a sadness that was almost tender. Fear is human too, he said. I have feared many things. Losing people, losing myself. But silence is not fear for me. Silence is where I hear the truth. The audience erupted again, and for the first time, Angelina did not respond right away. Something about his words seemed to echo within her. The clash that was meant to humiliate him had instead revealed a different battlefield, one not fought with sharp words but with raw honesty. Still, The night was not over. There were more questions, more sparks waiting to ignite. The producers whispered backstage, hungry for drama, but what unfolded was deeper than they had planned. This was not just a fight between two Hollywood icons. It was a mirror, reflecting the struggle between power and humility, fire and calm, pride and grace. And the audience, both in the studio and across millions of screens, leaned closer, knowing they were watching not just entertainment, but a lesson unfolding in real time. The first act of the story had been set. The clash was only beginning. The energy in the studio was shifting. The air carried a tension that felt alive, like thunder waiting above the clouds. Angelina sat back in her chair, her eyes locked on Keanu, with an expression that mixed curiosity and challenge. She was not used to meeting calm that did not crumble. The host leaned forward, sensing the moment had more to give. Keanu, Angelina believes silence hides fear. Do you want to prove her wrong? Tell us what your silence has cost. The crowd hushed. This was not a simple question. It was a trap designed to peel him open on live television. Keanu's jaw tightened for the first time that evening. Memories flashed like lightning in his mind. Funerals, lonely nights, the heavy weight of grief. He could dodge the question, laugh it away, protect himself with charm. But that was not his way. His voice broke the silence, steady, yet soft. Silence cost me the chance to say goodbye. I was too quiet when I should have spoken. I lost people I loved, and my silence followed me like a shadow. But it also taught me to listen, and sometimes listening saves lives. A murmur swept through the audience. People shifted in their seats, some wiping their eyes without even realizing. Angelina's lips parted slightly, as though she had not expected him to share something so raw, so unguarded. The host pressed again, hungry for more. Angelina, what do you say to that? Do you still see silence as weakness? She smiled tightly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Pain is universal. We all carry it. But not everyone chooses to bear it on a stage. Maybe silence is his comfort, but for others it looks like surrender. The clash grew sharper. The audience leaned forward, caught between admiration and discomfort. Keanu's calmness made her words feel like fire striking water, loud, sizzling, but unable to consume him. He turned to her, his eyes kind but unyielding. Sometimes surrender is not giving up. Sometimes it is laying down arms, choosing not to fight battles that only create more wounds. I choose peace, even when the world demands war. The applause roared, but behind it was a rising whisper. Was Angelina being cornered on her own stage? For the first time, her composure faltered. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the armrest. The host, sensing vulnerability, stirred the pot further. Angelina, you've built a reputation as one of the strongest women in Hollywood, unafraid of conflict. Do you think Keanu's way would have ever worked for you? She laughed sharply, though the sound was thinner now. If I had chosen silence, I would have been crushed. I had to fight for everything, for my roles, for my voice, for my children. Silence would not have saved me. It would have buried me. The audience applauded her too, the tension splitting the room. Two truths stood on that stage, both heavy, both undeniable. Keanu nodded, acknowledging her fight. And you are standing here because of that strength, he said. But maybe strength takes many shapes. Yours is fire, mine is water. Both can survive storms. For a moment, the room softened. Her eyes flickered with something unspoken, respect, perhaps, or recognition. But just as quickly, the moment was broken by the host's next move. Let's test this, he said suddenly, his tone almost gleeful. A quick challenge. We've set up questions on the screen behind us. One is about your greatest failure, the other about your greatest regret. Each of you must choose one to answer. Live right now. The crowd gasped. The screen lit up, two words blazing across it: failure and regret. Angelina was quick, her confidence flashing again. Failure, she said. Because I turned every failure into something greater. I failed at marriage, at holding some things together, but each failure taught me to rise higher. Regret, though, that is poison. I do not let it touch me. The audience clapped, her fire returning. She looked at Keanu, daring him to match her boldness. He paused, his face unreadable. Then he spoke, quiet but clear. I choose regret. Because regret means you loved enough to wish you had done more. I regret not holding someone longer. I regret not saying words that might have mattered. Regret reminds me I am human, and I carry it not as poison but as memory. The silence that followed was thick, almost unbearable. Then came the applause, louder than before, rolling like a wave across the studio. But behind the applause was a shift no one had predicted. Angelina's eyes glistened for a second, as though his words had reached a part of her she rarely let anyone see. The host opened his mouth to stir things further, but Angelina raised a hand, cutting him off. You speak of regret like it is a treasure, she said softly. Her tone changed. Maybe I envy that. Maybe I fear it because it hurts too much. The room froze. This was not the clash the producers had expected. This was something else entirely. Two warriors dropping their armor, if only for a breath. But just as the air began to settle, the unexpected twist came. From the back of the studio, a voice shouted, "Ask him about the letter." The cameras swung wildly. The audience buzzed. Angelina frowned, confused. The host looked shocked, but intrigued. Keanu's eyes darkened, his calmness rippling like water struck by a stone. The crowd waited. Angelina leaned closer. What letter? She asked, her voice quiet but heavy. The battle on stage had shifted. This was no longer about silence or strength. It was about secrets. Secrets waiting to be revealed under the brightest lights in the world. The clash was no longer just words. It was about to become a storm. The audience erupted in restless murmurs, their eyes darting between Keanu and Angelina, as though every person in the room had just been handed a secret they weren't supposed to know. The word letter hung in the air like smoke. The host shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly blindsided. This was not part of the script. Keanu's expression was steady, but his stillness was louder than any outburst could have been. His eyes, usually gentle, now carried a weight that made the air heavier. Angelina leaned closer, her curiosity sharpened by instinct. She sensed a fracture, a hidden story. What letter? She asked again, this time slower, her voice more personal than performative. The host jumped in, eager to keep control. Folks, let's not get carried away with interruptions. Maybe this is just someone trying to stir drama, but the damage was already done. The audience was on fire, whispers building, cameras zooming tighter on Keanu's face. He drew in a deep breath, and for a moment, it looked like he might stay silent. Let the storm pass over him. But then, almost unexpectedly, he spoke. The letter was from someone I loved. She wrote it before she passed. I never read it until years later. It was buried in a drawer, waiting. When I finally opened it, her words tore me apart and healed me at the same time. The room froze. Even the host, who usually thrived on chaos, fell quiet. Angelina tilted her head, her fierce expression softening. What did it say? She asked. Keanu hesitated. His jaw clenched, his eyes dropped to his hands. Then he looked up, not at Angelina, not at the host, but at the crowd, at the millions watching through screens around the world. It said, "Don't live in silence, Keanu. Let the world know you feel. Let them know you love. Don't disappear into the shadows even when they scare you." A wave of emotion rolled across the room. Some in the audience cried openly. Angelina's face shifted. First surprise, then something else, something harder to name. And you carried that letter, she said quietly. But you still chose silence. Keanu gave a small, almost broken smile. Yes, because silence is where I hear her voice. I live in both worlds, hers and mine. It is not easy, but it is honest. The host cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to steer this back toward safe ground. But before he could speak, Angelina leaned forward, her fire returning. You see? That's exactly the problem. You call it honesty, but it's retreat. You hide behind silence, behind regret. The letter told you to speak, to share, and yet you sit here talking about shadows. Maybe you're not as humble as people believe. Maybe you're just afraid. The crowd gasped. The clash was back, sharper than ever. Keanu didn't flinch. He held her gaze, his voice quiet but piercing. Fear is not weakness, Angelina. It is a teacher, and every day I try to learn. The room split in two. Half the audience clapped for her, half for him. The tension grew unbearable. The host, sensing the electricity, made a bold move. Since the letter has come up, maybe we should read part of it here. Keanu, do you have it with you? The audience roared with anticipation. Angelina's eyes widened, caught between disbelief and fascination. You didn't bring it here, did you? She asked. Keanu sat very still. Then slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. The entire room seemed to inhale as one. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased by years of being opened and closed. The host's jaw dropped. Ladies and gentlemen, Keanu Reeves has the letter with him right now. The studio lit up with flashes from audience phones, security trying in vain to keep people seated. Angelina leaned in, her voice almost a whisper. Why would you carry that? Every day? His answer was simple. Because it reminds me to stay human. The host stood, gesturing to the cameras. Keanu, will you read it for us? Right here, live? The question sent a shiver through the studio. Angelina's eyes locked onto his, silently daring him, but also almost pleading. Keanu looked down at the fragile paper, then back up at the sea of faces, the millions unseen but watching. He unfolded the letter slowly, the microphone picking up the sound of crumpled edges. But before he could speak, a stagehand rushed from behind the curtain, whispering frantically into the host's ear. The host's face blanched. He turned back, to the audience, visibly shaken. We've just been informed that reading the letter may not be permitted. Legal restrictions, personal rights. We need to pause. The crowd groaned with frustration. Angelina looked furious, not at Keanu, but at the interruption. She turned to him, eyes blazing. So the truth stays hidden again. The audience buzzed with noise, some shouting, some pleading. Keanu folded the letter gently, sliding it back into his pocket. His calmness returned, but behind his eyes burned something deeper, a storm contained. The truth is not in the paper, he said softly. It is in how we live. But Angelina wasn't done. Her voice cut sharp through the noise. Then prove it, not with silence, not with calm words. Show us you can live what she asked of you. The room erupted. The cameras zoomed in on their faces, hers fierce, his steady, both caught in a battle that was no longer about image or performance. It was about whether kindness and humility could survive the fire of challenge, whether truth could survive silence. And somewhere behind the scenes, producers whispered urgently into headsets. Because what had started as a talk show clash was now a story the whole world would not turn away from. The studio was no longer just a stage. It had become a battlefield, and the audience was the roaring crowd hungry for blood or redemption. The host shuffled nervously in his seat, his smile twitching, torn between ratings gold and the risk of going too far. Angelina leaned back, crossing her legs, her gaze fixed on Keanu with a kind of fiery challenge that felt personal now. Behind, the cameras, producers whispered into headsets, their words spilling out through frantic hand signals. The show was breaking its own script. They had not planned for the letter, not for this raw storm of confession and confrontation, but they were not about to let it slip away. One of them passed a note to the host. He cleared his throat, his voice louder, steadier than before. Ladies and gentlemen, since tonight has become more than an interview, we're going to try something new, a real test of truth. We've set up a segment called the Mirror Challenge. Both of you must face questions not from me, not from each other, but from the audience. Real people, real voices. The crowd cheered wildly. Angelina's eyes sparked with interest. Keanu gave a faint nod, as though he had expected nothing less. The host gestured to a young woman in the front row. She stood, clutching the microphone with trembling hands. "Keanu," she said, her voice breaking. "My brother loved you. He passed away last year. Your movies were his comfort. He always said you were proof that good men could exist, in Hollywood. My question is, how do you keep carrying hope when you've lost so much?" The room fell silent again. Keanu's face softened, his shoulders heavy with memory. He leaned toward the woman, his voice tender. "I carry hope because people like your brother carried it first. Their belief gives me strength. I do not always feel strong, but when I remember the kindness of strangers, the love of those who are gone, I know I must keep going. For them. For us." The woman burst into tears and the crowd clapped softly, respectfully. Angelina shifted in her seat, her jaw tight. For the first time, she looked shaken, not because of his words, but because they stirred something deep inside her. The next question came from a man in the back row, his tone sharper. "Angelina, you say silence is weakness, but isn't attacking others on stage another form of fear? Do you fight because you're strong, or because you're afraid of being hurt first?" The audience buzzed with tension. All eyes turned to her. Angelina froze for a heartbeat, her practiced confidence wavering. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then finally answered with fire in her voice. "I fight because I had to. I fight because the world does not give power to women like me without clawing it from their hands. Maybe I am afraid, yes, but fear gave me claws. Without it, I would not have survived." The audience erupted in cheers and whistles. Her honesty hit like lightning. Dangerous, brilliant, undeniable. Keanu nodded slowly, as though respecting her fire, even as it burned close. But the producers were not satisfied. The host announced the final round of the mirror challenge, his tone dramatic. "One last question, and both of you must answer it. No silence, no excuses. The question is this: what is the one truth about yourself you have never admitted in public?" The crowd gasped. Phones shot up to capture the moment. Angelina's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with determination. She sat up straight, her voice firm. "The truth? I am tired. I am tired of being the warrior all the time. I fight, yes, but sometimes I wish I could just be held, not as a leader, not as a fighter, just as a woman. That is my truth." The audience clapped softly, many visibly moved, but all eyes quickly turned to Keanu. He sat motionless, staring at the floor for a long, heavy moment. Then he lifted his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "My truth is that I am lonely. People see me surrounded by lights, applause, stories. But when the curtain falls, I walk home alone. I have friends, I have respect. But there are nights when the silence is so deep I wonder if I am fading into it. I tell myself I am strong, but inside, I ache for the family I lost, and I ache for the family I never built." The audience erupted in shocked murmurs, some gasping, others crying quietly. Angelina's expression changed in an instant. Her fierce mask slipped, and for the first time she looked at him not as an opponent but as a man standing in the rawest truth of himself. The host, overwhelmed by the moment, tried to wrap it up. "Incredible, truly incredible, two icons stripped of pretense, but the world will decide what to make of this clash." But before the applause could settle, a producer rushed onto the stage, whispering urgently. The host paled. We've just received word," he stammered, "that someone has leaked part of Keanu's letter online. It's trending worldwide right now." The audience gasped. Angelina turned to Keanu, her eyes wide. "The letter you carry," she whispered. "It's no longer just yours." Keanu sat still, his face unreadable, his silence louder than the chaos exploding around him. The studio cracked open like a storm. People in the audience pulled out their phones, screens glowing with breaking headlines. Keanu Reeves's private letter leaked online. The host's earpiece buzzed with frantic voices. Producers scrambled, shouting into headsets. The air vibrated with chaos, but on stage, Keanu sat perfectly still. His silence was no longer calm. It was heavy, like the center of a hurricane. Angelina leaned forward, her fire dimmed by the shock. Her voice was low but carried across the crowd. "Keanu, what do you want to do?" He looked at her, his eyes tired yet steady. "What I always do. Face it." The host cleared his throat, trying to hold the show together. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears the letter, something very personal to Keanu, has already been read by millions online. We have to ask Keanu, do you want to address this here now in front of everyone watching?" All eyes pressed down on him. Keanu drew a slow breath, then nodded. "If the world already has my words, then let me give them my voice." The audience hushed to silence. Even the buzzing phone stopped for a moment. Keanu pulled the worn paper from his pocket again, unfolding it with care, his hand steady though his heart clearly was not. He began to read aloud, his voice soft, unshaken. "My love, I know your silence hides 1,000 storms. I know you believe you must carry pain alone, but I want you to live, not just survive. Do not vanish into shadows. Show the world your heart. Do not fear being broken. It only means you lived fully." The words lingered like smoke. Some audience members openly wept. Angelina's lips trembled, though she pressed them tight, holding her fire. Keanu folded the letter again, his voice lower. "She wrote that years ago. I failed to listen then. I cannot fail again." Applause erupted, not the wild roar of entertainment, but the steady rising sound of people who had been cracked open by his truth. But the producers saw something else, a moment that could spiral beyond their control. One of them whispered urgently into the host's earpiece. The host blinked, then spoke with forced brightness. "Since the letter is now public, we want to give Angelina a chance too. Angelina, would you be willing to share something personal? Something the world doesn't know about you?" The challenge shifted toward her. She stiffened, her guard instinctively snapping back into place. But then she looked at Keanu, the man who had just bared his wounds without flinching. Something in her cracked. Her voice came low, unsteady. "The world sees me as strong, as unshakable. But the truth is, I have nights when I cry alone. I wonder if my children will ever see me as more than a fighter, more than a symbol. I ache to be just their mother, not their shield. That's my truth." The audience gave a softer applause, almost reverent. For the first time, both of them sat exposed on the stage, no longer opponents, but two humans holding pain the world could finally see. And then came the twist. A producer rushed forward with a tablet, whispering loudly enough for the host to hear. The host's face went pale, then serious. "We've just learned that the leak of the letter did not happen by accident. It was sent anonymously from inside this building. Someone here wanted it exposed." Gasps ripped through the crowd. Angelina's eyes widened. She turned sharply toward the host. "Are you saying someone here betrayed him?" The host nodded grimly. "That's what it looks like. And security is investigating right now." All at once, the clash between Keanu and Angelina no longer mattered. The story had twisted into betrayal, into questions of trust, into the mystery of who would exploit such pain for spectacle. Keanu's face remained calm, but his eyes darkened with something deeper. "I don't care who leaked it," he said softly. "Pain spreads fast, but so does hope. If the letter is out there, then let it remind people of love. Let it remind them that silence does not have to win." The crowd cheered again, their voices rising like a wave. But behind the cheers, Angelina leaned closer, her words only for him. "Someone wanted to break you, but instead, you're turning it into light. How do you do that?" His reply was barely a whisper. "Because I've lived long enough to know that anger burns you, but kindness rebuilds you." The show's host tried to regain control, but the night was no longer his to steer. The leak had changed everything. Keanu and Angelina were no longer just celebrities sparring on stage. They had become unwilling partners in a story that now belonged to the world. And as the cameras panned across their faces, a single truth became clear. The next chapter would not be about humiliation or rivalry. It would be about survival, resilience, and the search for the one thing both of them had confessed they lacked: peace. The stage had become more than a talk show. It was now a confessional, a courtroom, and a battlefield all at once. The revelation that someone inside the building had leaked Keanu's letter sent ripples through the air. The audience leaned forward, buzzing with a mix of shock and curiosity. The host shuffled in his seat, struggling to keep control. Security moved quietly along the edges of the studio, their eyes scanning the staff. Angelina glanced at Keanu, her face no longer sharp with challenge but softened by something else: respect, maybe even guilt. She whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "They wanted to humiliate you, but instead you gave them grace." Keanu met her gaze, his voice low. "Grace is the only answer to betrayal. If I fight fire with fire, I lose myself." The host leaned toward the cameras, his tone trembling but professional. "We've just confirmed the leak came from a production assistant. They've been escorted out. The show will continue, but the question remains: why would someone do this?" The audience erupted into murmurs. Angelina's eyes narrowed, her instincts sharp again. "Because pain sells," she said flatly. "Because the world feeds on brokenness." They wanted ratings, not truth. Her words landed hard, and the audience clapped in agreement. Keanu nodded, though his calm never wavered. "And yet here we are, speaking truth anyway." Then, almost without warning, a young man from the back row of the audience stood up, his voice trembling but strong. "Maybe the letter leaked because the world needed it. Maybe people needed to hear those words. I know I did. I was ready to give up last week. Hearing you read it, Keanu, it saved me." The entire studio froze. The man's raw confession cut deeper than anything else that night. Keanu's eyes softened, and for the first time he smiled. Not the practiced smile of a star, but something fragile and real. He stood slowly, stepping down from the stage, the cameras following him. He walked to the young man, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Then it was worth it." The audience burst into applause, many now openly weeping. Angelina watched from the stage, her eyes glistening, her own fire humbled. The host, his voice breaking, tried to close the show. Tonight was supposed to be a clash, but it became something else, something bigger than us. "Keanu, Angelina, any final words?" Angelina rose from her seat, walking toward Keanu. She paused beside him, her voice carrying through the silence. "I came here ready to fight. I thought strength meant never bending, never breaking. But you showed me strength can also mean being gentle. Maybe I needed that reminder." Keanu nodded, his words quiet but powerful. "And you reminded me that silence is not always enough. Sometimes the world needs to hear our voices even when they shake." The two stood side by side, no longer opponents but equals. Two people who had carried pain in different ways, now meeting in the same light. The cameras zoomed in as the audience rose to their feet, giving a standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, rolling like waves, carrying the weight of everything that had been said and revealed. As the lights dimmed and the credits began to roll, the last image the world saw was not of humiliation, not of rivalry, but of Keanu and Angelina standing shoulder to shoulder. Two figures who had turned conflict into connection. Outside the studio, social media exploded, headlines spinning across the globe. But for those who had watched live, one truth stood above the noise. In a world that craves spectacle, kindness and honesty can still bring silence to a room. And for Keanu Reeves, the letter that had once been a private shadow had finally become what it was meant to be: light,